Governor Ronald Reagan, Republican of California, and Governor Nelson Rockefeller, Republican of New York. Here are the issues. Can Republican conservatives support President Nixon's programs on welfare reform, cuts in defense spending, and withdrawal from Vietnam? Can Republican moderates support President Nixon's cutbacks in domestic spending, his Southern strategy, and his choice of Vice President Agnew as his running mate? Will the Nixon-Agnew ticket carry New York and California? From the 1972 Republican National Convention in Miami Beach, the American Broadcasting Company brings you the award-winning interview program, Issues and Answers. Our guests, Governor Ronald Reagan of California, temporary chairman of the 1972 Republican National Convention, and Governor Nelson Rockefeller of New York, who will place Richard Nixon's name in nomination on Tuesday night. They will be interviewed by ABC News correspondent Dick Shoemaker and ABC News special correspondent Frank Reynolds.
Governor Reagan, Governor Rockefeller, welcome to Issues and Answers. I'm bound to say that this might have been a more interesting program had we staged it 4 years ago, the day before the Republican National Convention opened, when there were some apparent differences between you two. Are you now marching to the same drum in all ways?
Supporting the same man.
That's right. Governor Reagan, you will be the temporary chairman. You'll be in charge there at the time this one controversy that we have in Miami seems to come to the floor about the question of representation in the 1976 convention. What's your view on it now? Are you supporting the big states or the smaller states?
Well, I am hoping that some of the very practical ideas for compromise that have been proposed will be the outcome of the committees that are working with this. I suppose in a way you'd have to say I'm supporting the small states, even though from a large state, in that I believe our whole national structure and our political structure within our parties is geared to the recognition that we are a federation in this country of independent states, sovereign states, and there is a limit beyond which you cannot go with one man, one vote without destroying that federation and having us wind up simply with just a broad popular-based decisions, majority rule on a national basis, which would, of course, end up with rule by several large cities and states in the nation.
Well, Governor Rockefeller, do you share Governor Reagan's view about this question of representation in the Republican Party?
Well, I'd have to say this, that in my opinion, one man, one vote, Supreme Court decision, a lot of people were worried about it at the time. I personally thought it was a great thing. I think that the Republican Party needs to go where the people are, to represent the people, and this has worked out very well. And that in this case here, the Supreme Court has said that our present structure is not constitutional, therefore we've got to come up with another one. And I think Republicans should be represented at the convention by state delegations, but on a basis which represents the numerical strength.
We keep hearing, you know, that this is the open-door convention, the open-door party. Are you satisfied that the Republican Party, as constituted today at this convention, is really representative of the people in your states? You have 4 blacks on your delegation, Governor Reagan, I understand. You have 8 from New York.
Sure. 42% women, too.
We're 34% women, I think, in our delegation.
We followed the plan that Ronnie had developed, namely that there would be honorary delegates. And so I'm here as an honorary delegate in order that we could broaden the base of our party. All of our statewide elected officials are honorary delegates, and we've broadened the base of our party in terms of representation, and I think this is good. And I'd like to see the numerical strength of the delegations reflect the number of Republicans in the areas. And this, you say, is it open door? This shows it is open door. Here we are having an open discussion on a fundamental issue, but I think that's the strength of the party, that we're not a monolithic party. We've always had tremendous vitality, and we debate these issues among ourselves.
I'm pretty good evidence of the fact it's an open-door policy. 10 years ago, I was a Democrat.
The party welcomes.
Don't you find it difficult to explain, though, that whether this convention is really representative of the Republican Party, there are apparently less than 4% blacks of the delegates at this convention, less than 8% who are under 30 years of age. How can this be a representative convention?
Well, Dick, could I take a crack at that? Remember that a convention represents a party, not the numerical divisions within the country.
That's right.
Now, you have named one ethnic group in our country that has consistently voted 90% or better with the other party. Now, shouldn't the representation within our party represent those people that associate themselves with our party and our views? And I think this is an explanation. I would think that our proportion of minority members in our convention is closer to their support of the Republican Party than their representation was in the Democratic convention, where they have 95% of them voting Democratic.
Are you saying then that the Republican Party is going to remain an insular party, not
Oh, no.
expand its base?
No, we're doing everything we can. And frankly, I think that some of the minority groups that you've mentioned are making a very great mistake in continuing to go along and be taken for granted by a party that has paid them great lip service for many years, but that has very little to show in the line of accomplishment. Because the Richard Nixon's administration in 3 years has done more in the line of appointments to government positions, in the line of desegregating schools, in the line of offering opportunity to minority business, than was done in all the 8 years of Camelot in the Great Society.
Governor Rockefeller, are you prepared to support the so-called Southern strategy as you campaign in New York for the Nixon ticket?
Well, I don't know what strategy you're referring to. I'm supporting the president very strongly because of his positions on key issues and because of his actions during these past 3.5 years.
Well, I mean specifically civil rights.
Well, he's done more to support civil rights in terms of actual support in his budget than any other president or any other administration. And he's got twice as many blacks in key positions and twice as many women in key positions as any previous administration. And I'd like to just go back to the question Ronnie was talking about. As far as New York's concerned, we've had a very much higher percentage of support of blacks in the elections, running as high as 35% in the elections. And we need a bigger delegation in order to be able to have broader representation in our delegation. Traditionally, we've followed the present plan, the present structure, which has been declared unconstitutional. And we have a great many people who are party officers and so forth, who are party workers. And Ronnie has pointed out very well that we need, and I think it's to their interest, to have minority groups actually much more active in the party and working to help us formulate positions and policies and to do the work and to represent the party.
Do you see this maneuvering over the question of representation in 1976 as really a battle over the presidential nomination in 76?
No.
Is it pro-anti-Agnew?
No,
What is it?
absolutely not. This is a question that there was a decision made by the Supreme Court. We've got to come up with a new structure, and what shall that structure be? And you've got 2 points of view here. I just think that this is a thing that was bound to happen because of the Supreme Court decision.
Well, it is generally said, however, that the small states view, the one you expressed, Governor Reagan, would probably be more sympathetic to an Agnew candidacy in 1976.
Well, I hadn't thought of it from that standpoint.
I didn't hear him
remember
say
also
that.
that
I didn't hear him say that.
No, and remember that I mentioned a thing called a compromise, that I believe that there is a happy area in there, a medium that we can all agree upon, that will meet this Supreme Court requirement that Nelson has mentioned, and that at the same time will not go as far extreme as some have suggested we go in changing the structure.
But if we don't take a strong extreme position, we won't get the compromise.
You take a strong, extreme position
Yeah,
in order
one man,
to,
one vote. That's what he said, that there will be a compromise between the extreme positions.
See, and I'm delighted to learn there that he's just given away his bargaining position.
No, I haven't. No. When you see what happens on the floor, you're going to be presiding. So you're going to have to cope
You know,
with
as long as the topic has come up about the vice president. Governor Reagan, what about this story in the Chicago paper the other day, that you had actually been offered the vice presidency by President Nixon just a few months ago?
No, this was an embarrassment, I think, to everyone, and an embarrassment to me because it was invented out of whole cloth. There absolutely was nothing to it. There never was such an offer. There was never, to my way of thinking, the president has never indicated to me anything other than that he was determined that Vice President Agnew would continue on the ticket. And I don't know where they got that. I think it's just the kind of smoke that's dreamed up when convention time comes around.
Well, there were quotations from Mrs. Reagan in the story. Did
I
you
know,
remember that?
and Mrs. Reagan was the most surprised person in the world to read those. And I know for a fact that there just never has been any such thing.
Governor Rockefeller, will the vice president help the president in New York State?
Well, it was a winning ticket 4 years ago.
Not in New York.
Not in New York, but I'd like to say that there's a tremendous interest in President Nixon in New York, his policies and his actions since he's become president. And that I have a strong feeling that this great interest is going to be translated into votes.
Governor Reagan in California, the Democrats have registered an additional 1 million voters. Do you think that this is going to give the president trouble come November?
Well, I think in California, we always run as if we're one vote behind as Republicans, because we are outnumbered 3-2. And we do know, and I know, as I mentioned before, my own previous affiliation, I know how difficult it is for a person to cross over in that polling booth and mark the other ballot. So running scared is just typical of Republicans out there. I believe that what the president has done since he has been in office, and the way it is beginning to bear fruit right now, the actions he has taken, are appealing to people who see this. The Democrats had a most successful registration drive in connection with the recent primary. We didn't have the same enthusiasm because we didn't have the primary contest. We now are embarked on a registration campaign and drive ourselves. But we know that we're not going to change that 3-2 ratio that they have over us.
Are you saying there's going to be a tough time in California for Mr. Nixon?
I always assume there's going to be a tough time.
Governor Reagan, Governor Rockefeller, we must pause briefly here. We'll be back in a moment with more issues and answers.
The Summer Olympics. This time, we're sending 2 teams. America's finest young athletes and the finest television sports team in the world. You'll see more coverage of more events in more prime evening hours than any sporting event in history. Summer Olympics, up close and personal, the ABC way.
Gentlemen, I wonder reaction to what seems to be a rather fantastic number of polls coming out.
Just as hard as possible to get to the people so that they understand fully what he has done, what he has accomplished, and what his hopes are for the future.
You think the president himself should campaign very actively? You know, we've heard talk that he would be the president and allow others to go out and do the active campaigning. You think Mr. Nixon himself should come out? That's what Senator McGovern wants him to do, I know.
Well, I think he's working right now in the most important way for the future of our country by trying to terminate the war in Vietnam. His recent trips to China and to Russia have been fantastic in terms of the real opportunity for a generation of peace. I think that what he's done and is doing is giving the people an understanding of what possibilities we've got for the future of peace and opportunity and dignity in the world.
Do you think, either one of you, that there's a danger of overconfidence here? It seems to me that you're ripe for a galloping dose of overconfidence with these polls coming out showing such mass defections to the president.
Yes, but I always try to remember the words of President Dewey, that you shouldn't let yourself get that overconfident.
That's right.
And, no, there is a danger, of course. I suppose we fear it at the rank and file level, that they might just walk away with this euphoria. And this is apropos of your idea of your mentioning the polls. If you look back through the years, you'll find that at the end of a hard-fought primary, polls have always indicated there is a discontent among those whose candidates didn't get nominated. But as the campaign goes on and effort is made to pull a party together, you'll find those polls begin to come back and more nearly reflect the the balance of the parties. So no Republican should be swept away by the polls now. It's what the polls show in October that counts.
Looking at Vietnam, which, of course, is going to have a tremendous impact between now and November. Now, Secretary of State Rogers has come out today and flatly predicted, at least it was quoted in the paper, that there will be a negotiated settlement in Vietnam by the end of this year, shortly before or after the election. Now, you talked to the president just the other day. Do you get any feeling, any indication that this is a true prediction?
Well, I had to report to the president on the trip that I had made for him to several European countries. And you won't believe this, but Vietnam was never mentioned. By the time I had reported back on the messages that I carried back to him, and he had questioned me about my own impressions in the meetings that I'd had with the heads of state in those 7 countries in Europe, the time was up, and I was on my way down here. But so this wasn't mentioned. I don't know. I think there is reason for optimism. I think he has followed exactly the right course. I think if 3.5 years ago, when we were down here before, anyone then had suggested that a president of the United States could blockade the harbors at Haiphong, could begin bombing the enemy as he has to bring him to the bargaining table, and still be received in Peking and Moscow as cordially as the president was received, no one would have believed this. But he has proven, I think that alone is the proof that he is on the right course. And most of the European leaders that I met with told me that this was the first American president in a long time that had had a realistic understanding of the world situation and was embarked on a plan that was not only common sense, but that held out the hope for peace.
Do you go along with Mr. Rogers, though, in thinking that between now and November, or shortly after the election, there is going to be a negotiated peace?
Now you're talking, I couldn't hazard that. He is the Secretary of State, and you're talking about someone who has access to information that only he and the president have.
Governor Rockefeller, do you support the bombing campaign?
I think there's an interesting angle to this. Excuse me if I just finish the question that was asked. Really, Mr. McGovern has posed a very difficult choice to Hanoi because, and put them, I would think, in a quandary. He has, in this morning's paper, said virtually, in fact, actually, that he adopts their total program for peace, which is their complete program. Therefore,
I'm not sure that was, you feel that all Mr. McGovern says, as I understand
excuse me, I was just telling my opinion.
Oh, all right.
Excuse me.
Well, are you saying
Which
that
I think
Senator
is
McGovern
true.
said that he's adopting the...
No, but if you read what was said this morning, it is the Hanoi position.
Well, he predicted the 2 would have to run for his life if he's nominated.
But that's what Hanoi
Or
wants.
elected.
The point I'm coming to is, if they have a candidate, and I don't think this has ever happened in the history of this country before, where the opponent who's running against the incumbent president has entered into foreign policy as completely as he has in this situation, and therefore what would the North Vietnamese position be? Are they going to wait until they can get their program? And I think this has a bearing on the question you ask. Is there going to be peace? And I think they've got a tough decision to make.
Don't you think this administration, the Republican administration, would support wholeheartedly the withdrawal of President Thieu?
They've already stated that if there was a peace, that he would leave office before elections.
And hold an election.
That's
Governor
right.
Reagan, are there any lingering doubts among the Republican right, whatever that is, about the president's initiatives toward Moscow and Peking, the SALT agreement? I know you've expressed some fears about the defense posture of the United States.
No, I think that a great many Republicans, I wouldn't estimate the number, were concerned when the first announcement was made about going to Peking. And I have said before that I think this was based on the experiences we've had since World War II, when you start looking at Yalta and Potsdam and the Bay of Pigs and a few other incidences where Americans have felt that we were following the old cynical policy of winning a war and losing a peace, and so they were frightened. But I think there were others who believed that this president knew what he was doing, was not going to Peking to give something away, not sell American interests down the river, and now the brilliance of the plan that he was evidently embarked upon has become evident. That, followed by Moscow, coupled with what he is doing in the war, reveals that The man that closed the harbor at Haiphong, after for almost 10 years that harbor has been used to supply the munitions that were killing Americans, this is hardly a man that is going to appease the enemy and is giving any American interests away.
Gentlemen, we'll continue in just a moment. We'll pause briefly now. We'll be back with more issues and answers.
Pardon me. Could you give me the classes of the aliphatic heterocyclic compounds?
Cyclic ethers and thioethers of glycols and thioglycols, cyclic alkylamines resulting from carbons by loss of chloride, the lactones and lactides.
Oh, by the way, what's the conductive index on that new oxide coating?
Why do you want these data?
Well,
You are a chemical engineer, not an electrical engineer.
I had an idea I wanted to
Please
try.
stay in your own field. Obviously, you cannot know anything about coatings or you would be in that department.
But my idea...
I repeat, stay in your own field. Quit making trouble where you're...
Hi. You don't have to put up with that kind of stuff, you know. At 3M, there's no law saying a man from another department can't contribute something. Heck, that's how we invented our masking tape. And that new machine that copies color in color. Boy, that computer, I had to pull its plug twice yesterday. We're going to have to reprogram it.
The ABC Sunday Night Movie presents the most impressive motion picture lineup ever brought to television in a single season, with such outstanding films as Patton, starring George C. Scott, Goldfinger, starring Sean Connery, Dr. Dolittle, starring Rex Harrison, Plaza Suite, starring Walter Matthau, Lawrence of Arabia, starring Peter O'Toole. Also, The Adventurers, Z, Paint Your Wagon, The Odd Couple, those daring young men in their jaunty jalopies, True Grit, The Out-of-Towners, The Taming of the Shrew. This is the place to be on Sunday night.
Beginning September 17th here on ABC.
Said about that once. He knew where the cameras were and he had lizard blood.
Governor Reagan and Governor Rockefeller, you've both been called governor for some time now. What does the future hold for you? Are you anxious to leave Sacramento, maybe move to Washington, Governor Reagan?
Not at all. I have a little over, well, almost 2.5 years to go. I look forward to them. I have never been as challenged or enjoyed anything as much as I do this particular job, and that's what I want to do. Beyond 1974, I have made no plans whatsoever.
Would you like to run for another office for the Senate?
I have made no plans.
Would you accept an appointment from the president if he offered you one in the new Nixon administration?
Before 1974?
Sure.
No.
Governor Rockefeller, I understand you're the next Secretary of State. Is that true?
I'm honored by what you say, but I'm staying in New York.
Would you accept an appointment from the president?
Well, I would be tremendously honored, but frankly, I plan to stay in New York.
You don't
There
expect
are a tremendous
that, do you?
amount of things. We're in the middle, I think, and Ronnie knows this just as well, we're in the middle of the most interesting and extraordinary transition in the whole structure of the federal system, the role of state governments. I've spent 14 years as governor. I have programs in the field of education, welfare reform, and other programs which I think are extremely important for the future, not only for our state, but for other states, for the structure. And I would like to continue to work on these based on the experience I've had and to carry us through this period of change in a way that will be productive for the future, for the whole structure of the federal system in our country. These are tremendously challenging problems.
Would you like to be Secretary of State, Governor?
If I would like to be, then I'd answer your question differently.
Dick?
Governor Rockefeller, before the show, you mentioned your recent trip to Israel and that it was misunderstood in some ways. What did you mean by that?
Well, I didn't mention it, excuse me, but now that you've mentioned it, what was the question?
We were talking before the show, and you said that in your trip to Israel, you'd come back and there'd been misinformation given out about what you had found about the Jews.
About the agreement that you reported that President Nixon had concluded with the Russians.
Well, I gotta be honest, we didn't discuss this in this vein, but I'll say what I did say, that I was absolutely fascinated by what I saw in Israel, that I think that what has been accomplished there in the short period that's been accomplished is fantastic. That the thing that excited me most, though, in addition to the tremendous physical achievements that they made in conquering deserts and building for a nation for the future, is the fact that the relations between the Arabs and the Jews in Israel has now reached a point where there's tremendous communications, and as the president of Israel said, these are two sister peoples with two parallel languages, the only case in history, and he feels deeply that their destinies are on the same road for the future.
Well, Governor,
and I think this spells great hope for peace in the Middle East in the years ahead.
Governor, I think the question that we were trying to get at, I think you know it, was the question of the agreement that you reported the president concluded with the Russians during the SALT conference about the emigration of Soviet Jews to Israel. Did you say there was an agreement that the president
I did, and I said then it got to be, I didn't say this before the conversation, but I said in a press conference in New York that when I used the word agreement, I didn't mean a treaty. I meant a meeting of minds. And everybody knows that the flow of emigres from Russia to Israel, Jewish emigres, has stepped up, and they estimate now double what the rate was before.
Well, are you saying that that is a result of President Nixon's conversations with the Soviets?
I had, pointed out publicly, this was on the agenda. Everybody knew it. He took up the discussions. They were discussed there, and all I said was there was a meeting of minds which has now resulted in this increase.
But what about the new emigration fees that they have suddenly decided to impose?
Absolutely terrible. Unconscionable.
But don't you think that conflicts somewhat with the understanding that the president might have reached with them?
I have to assume that was not a matter that was then known.
Are you prepared to predict today that the president will carry California, Governor Reagan?
Yes, I think he's going to carry California. I think he's going to carry the nation.
What about New York?
Well, I'm not a great one for making predictions. As I said before, there's tremendous interest in what the president is doing for peace in the world and for the restoration of our economic activity and employment at home, and I think that's going to be translated into votes. And so I'm optimistic, but cautious.
Thank you very much, Governor Reagan and Governor Rockefeller, for being with us on Issues and Answers today. We've enjoyed having you.
Thank you.
Our guests today on Issues and Answers have been Governors Ronald Reagan of California and Nelson Rockefeller of New York. Next week, from Washington, D.C., Issues and Answers will bring you the chairman of Democrats for Nixon, former Treasury Secretary John Connally. We hope you will join us.